Hey there, everyone. Sarah Brown Westling here. I'm really excited to dig into this conversation about how to help our students still engage in productive group work, even when we are moving to an online environment. So, I want to kind of preface this conversation a little bit with, I think, a real natural thing that can happen when you're used to being in a face to face classroom and then you kind of quickly need to shift to an online environment. I think the first immediate shift really comes from a place of urgency and this sense of responsibility of getting content and work in front of students. And I think in our efforts to get content and work in front of students, what probably happens a lot is we just are assigning a lot of independent work. And independent work isn't the same as online learning. And so that's what I really want to dig into over these next few minutes, is really thinking about the difference between those two, right? So if we jump immediately to independent learning, which means we assign, we ask students to do the work, they give it back to us, we assign something else, we ask students to do the work, they give it back to us. What we've done in that model is we've actually just created learning as a transaction, right? And we are really, in that sense, just processing students instead of really engaging in a learning process. And so our focus can be how we can really reinstate that process of learning that has been so important in our face-to-face classrooms. One of the resources that we can use to help us as we think about this comes from the work of Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry and all of their incredible work on the gradual release of responsibility. You might already be familiar with these two inverted triangles. If you're not, I'm just going to kind of quickly review them here. But at the very top here, you can see that in this particular instructional model, the instruction always starts with a teacher think aloud, or where the teacher's modeling, and this is called the I do it stage. Then in this second phase here, called guided instruction, it's when the teacher and the student are doing some of that together. And then in the third phase, this is where we start to do what we call shifting the cognitive load, which is where we start to put more responsibility on the students as learners. And so this is where we work towards collaborative learning, and the students are doing it together. And then we as teachers become more like coaches, facilitators, nudgers, questioners, things like that. And then finally, at the very bottom here is when we release our students to independent work. So if you think about this model and you think about the natural hesitancy to just get work in front of students, there's a good chance we're missing maybe all three of these and probably the two in the middle, right? And when we miss that guided instruction and that collaborative learning, and we jump right to independent learning, we're missing what a lot of our students need, right? Because in that center space is where students are used to having connection. They have the familiarity of working in small groups or pairs, or being able to ask you a question, as soon as they have it. There's also that social nature of learning that is really central to that portion of the process that we're missing out on. So we're going to take a close look at guided instruction and collaborative learning as part of this larger process. However, before we jump into this process, it's really important for us to always, as instructional designers, start with a question. And the question, I think, always has to be, what do they need to learn, right? Which is a really different question than what should they do, or what do the students need to do? When we ask the question, what should they do? We're really asking a question about filling time. We're asking a question about tasks. When we ask a question, what do they need to learn? We're thinking about what their brains have to do, right? We're thinking about that cognitive work, and we're thinking about those skills. So with that in mind, I'm going to share with you three different kind of scaffolded patterns for incorporating more guided instruction and productive group work based on three different models. So one is for specific content. Specific content would be if you had a problem you needed to have solved. There was vocabulary words that you really wanted students to work with, or there was really precise content you felt like they just needed to be able to make sense of, okay? Curated content might be more, you're pulling content from different places and you're asking students to synthesize that content or analyze that content. And then the third one is a personalized content. So you might be really interested in turning the learning over to students, giving them a lot of student choice. And if that's the case, that personalized content model is going to be the one for you. So let's dive in here to the specific content. So in specific content, remember, this is the one we're solving a problem, doing vocabulary, things like that. We're going to start with the teacher demonstrating his or her thinking, right? So let's say it's a problem. The teacher might record themselves ahead of time, or maybe if it's in an online forum where everyone is there, they can just talk out loud. But the purpose here is for a teacher to solve this problem, talking out loud about what their brain is doing as they are solving the problem. Once that's done, you're going to move on to the next phase. And this is that we do it together. And this phase, I think, really requires a shared document. So you want to have either a shared slide deck or a Google Doc or something where you and the students can be working on it together. So maybe they're doing some work, you can kind of see it. Maybe you're using some of the unique functions of your online platform. There might be a whiteboard. You might be using like a third-party sticky note posted, app or something like that. But you want to be able to start to see that together. Then the next phase is having the students in some groups practice these problems together, right? And so it might be a continued shared document. It might be more of the same. This also would be a great time to use breakout groups. So if you can create small groups, this is a wonderful time for you then not to just to create the groups, but for you to jump from group to group the same way that you would jump from group to group in a classroom, right? So once students have had the opportunity to practice, to ask you questions, to talk to each other as they're working through more problems or more examples, then we're ready for this last phase, which is really to release students to that independent work. And you can see when you just think about this structure, all of the instruction that takes place before we release them to independence, right? And how crucial that can be to really reinstating that process. So the next one here is the curated content. So this is the one where you're pulling and analyzing or synthesizing. I'm going to actually focus on how I would teach this if I were asking students to watch a video as part of their curated content. It's a great thing to be doing right now. We've got so many wonderful video resources for students, but we don't always talk to them about how to process that video or how to watch it in really beneficial ways. So here's what this would look like if I were doing this. So I would maybe choose like a TED Ed video. And I would take the first 60 to 90 seconds and I would screencast myself watching it and pausing it and then talking out loud about what I'm thinking or what I'm seeing or what I'm paying attention to. So, and then I would share that video with the students so that they would have access to what my brain is doing as I'm watching this, right? Then the next step would be to kind of have students practice this on their own. So in order to have students practice this on their own, I might say, if we're all together, I might say, okay, now I want you all to watch the next 90 seconds of this video. And I want you to do the same thing I just did, but I want you to, put your microphones on mute and I want you to try it on your own. And then I would talk out loud about what I did, and we would be able to talk about kind of the match between what they had done and then what they heard me do. You could also front load all of this and just make a second video, right? Okay, so once you've had a chance to do that, you're ready to let students watch the rest of the video content on their own, right? Practicing the skills that you had just modeled and worked on together. And then they are ready again for some productive groups. So this can again be using these breakout groups or other configurations of small groups. What's really important though, when you are working with this curated content, is that they don't go to a small group in order to answer a list of your teacher generated questions. What you really want them to accomplish in this small group is the chance for them to construct understanding. So if they're going to construct understanding, you might have them find examples of certain things. You might ask them to come up with their own questions. You might have them choose the two most important moments in that content and be able to give a rationale for why. So there are different ways to think about having them process, right? And then again, as the teacher, you're trying to jump into those groups as much as possible. And then finally, you're really ready to release students. So independently, maybe they watch some more content on their own, or maybe they are going to do some synthesis of what you've just done together. And so maybe that can be a reflection on their learning. It could be a letter to someone. It could be a letter to the maker of the video, right? So it's an opportunity, certainly, for you to think about releasing those students into that independence. Finally, when we're thinking about personalized content, we're thinking about a lot of student choice. So in this case, the teacher would probably start off talking about the student choice and talking a lot about the skills that you would want students to be able to practice during this learning experience. Once you've done that, students have a chance to make some choice about their content or whatever they're going to work on. They have to really create their own process. So they need to be able to do some things like ask some questions about when are they going to meet? How are they going to communicate? Is it going to be on video? Is it going to be on Flipgrid? Is it going to be through email? Is it going to be, through Voxer? Whatever apps you all are, already using, you need to give students an opportunity to think about that. They're going to have shared meeting times, or is it all going to be asynchronous? Once that happens, then you have to really determine the output, right? And this can be student selected as much as kind of teacher driven, but you can ask yourself, how would I want my students to demonstrate their learning? Do I want them to lead a discussion? Do I want them to teach someone else? Do I want them to connect to their previous learning, right? Those are all ways to do that. And then finally, when we get to that independent work, some of this may overlap with the group work in this particular case. But I just want to say that a group or an individual reflection truly is always a great way to end one of these personalized content experiences where you ask students, what did you learn? How does this matter? What are you curious about next? So as we're thinking about this, the purpose of it is ultimately to shift that cognitive load and to remember that instead of just trying to keep them busy, we want to try to keep them curious. And creating those scaffolds of this process within here will really help to achieve that. This takes time, right? It's one small change. So take one small step, try one small thing, and remember that lots of small shifts always can accumulate into really big change. Good luck, everybody.